Hi there, this is the Compass Podcast, Finding Spirituality in the Everyday. It's the podcast for finding the spiritual undertones of contemporary life. So let's find God's movement in your life right now. I'm your host, Ryan Dunn, and today we're bringing you a fun conversation that promises to challenge a little bit, inspire, and hopefully empower you as well. In this episode, I had a chat with Lenny Duncan, a voice of resilience and a beacon for change. Lenny shares their unique journey discussing the intersection of art, music, in this case hip hop, and spirituality. Their book, Psalms of My People, talks about the authenticity of hip hop and its relationship with the divine. So if you want to hear some cultural commentary from a spiritual perspective, if you want to explore how hip hop music speaks to both our human experience and our longing for spiritual connection, and if you want to learn a bit about the church of the future, then stay tuned for this conversation with Lenny. If you appreciate the value our show brings to your day, we'd be incredibly grateful if you would take a moment to leave us a rating and review. Your feedback not only helps us improve what we put on this show, but it also makes a huge difference in helping more listeners find us. So here's how you can leave a rating and review. On Apple Podcasts, open the Apple Podcast app on your phone or computer, search for Compass, Finding Spirituality in the Everyday, then scroll down to the ratings and reviews section. Tap the stars to rate the podcast, and if you have a moment, write a few words about what you enjoy about the show in the review section. On Spotify, launch the Spotify app on your mobile device, and then head to our podcast page. Below the podcast title, you'll see a rating section represented by stars. Tap to rate us. Although Spotify doesn't support written reviews yet, these stars really do count. On YouTube, head over to the YouTube channel or app, and then find our channel, Compass Podcast, Finding Spirituality in the Everyday. After watching an episode, hit that like button to show your support and leave a comment to tell us and other viewers what you thought about the episode. Your comments help increase our visibility on YouTube, and they grow our community. And don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so, you never miss out on our content. Okay. Now, a little bit about Lenny Duncan. Lenny is a writer, speaker, scholar, and media producer working at the forefront of racial justice in America. Lenny is the author of Psalms of My People, our inspiration for today's chat, also Dear Church and Dear Revolutionaries. Lenny's also the co-creator of the podcast BlackBerryJams with PRX. They're a PhD student in historical and cultural studies of religion. Lenny is originally from West Philadelphia, born and raised, has hitchhiked thousands of miles on American byways, and makes home up and down the I-5 to see found family and in the East Bay for research. So grab a cup of coffee, tune in, and let's journey together through this spiritual exploration and cultural exploration with Lenny Duncan. It's time to question, learn, perhaps even redefine a little bit about what it means to find spirituality in the everyday. Lenny Duncan, thank you so much for joining us on the Compass Podcast. How goes it with your soul today, Lenny?
Oh, it's the day after Bread and Circus Day, so the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
We all got in front of you know how it is, Malik. So we all had to. And this year, Malik was like super complicated. Malik was like, "I need teenage girls this year." So there was all the Taylor Swift stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And like the redemption of the billionaire again. Right? And then like Jay-Z, which, we'll talk about a little bit. Jay-Z was like, "No, I'm a good billionaire too." Like, it was like wild. He's like, "But I'm still an edgy one." And like, it was a weird Super Bowl. And then like, that ad campaign that like, if you're a Christian or you've ever worked as a faith leader,
yeah,
there is like no way you didn't notice those. He gets us.
Yeah. All right. So
and look, you said follow the money, right?
Yeah, I did.
Right. I mean, good organizing is always follow the money. A church's budget is a theological document.
Yeah.
A theological campaign's budget is a theological document. It reflects what they really believe, right? And that's okay. right? I'm just encouraging people to do their own research. But one of the things I said about that is like, some of y'all are hype AF for the He Gets Us campaign. Forget you hid like straight cowards in the house during the uprising.
Mm.
Just like you ain't fitting
Yeah.
to do anything as we push back these Christo-fascists for 9 months but vote, your chance to come out and love on folks like that ain't speculative. You wouldn't have to imagine what you would have done in a war scene or protest scenario if you would have joined us. You would know what your character is made of. You chose not to participate for the last few years. And some of y'all have no idea what it takes to be a peacemaker outside the congregation, and it shows. I'm just saying. Half those scenes that we saw in that commercial, I say, happen every day.
Mm.
And you ain't got to imagine them on Super Bowl night. And this isn't a call out. This is a call in, right? This is a call in. There's a call.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to imagine what it's like to go stand in between two sets of protesters. I've done it. And you may always say, like, well, it always seems like you take a side. Well, I tend to take the side of the most vulnerable. There was this dude in Nazareth. I'm just copying his style, right? I'm just copying his
We're
style.
getting
Right?
all theological. All right, here we go. The Jesus, you bring it.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and you don't have to imagine what it's like to stand in the middle of a war right now if you're paying attention to what's happening in Gaza.
Mm.
And no matter what you think theologically, no matter what you think politically, at the end of the day, right now, as you and I are recording this, Rafah is being invaded where the last million people are, where the last of the water is, where the last of the bread is, where somehow we have forgotten that political parties are not people. And we're willing to turn a blind eye because whether or not I agree with, a politics of any particular people in some country where I don't understand what's going on. So you don't have to imagine these scenes that we saw in the Super Bowl ad. There are opportunities in this world where you can wash the feet of people you don't agree with. It's not hard. It's scary and it takes courage. But most people who do courageous things know that fear is a big part of courage.
Mm. Yeah.
Particularly somatic fear in your body. Anyway, yeah. So that's where my heart's at.
Yeah.
I saw that campaign, and then like people are like, "Follow the money, it's bad," and then other people are like, "But it's saying a good
Put
thing."
the message.
And I'm like, you guys are missing the point. You don't have to wait for a $7 million Super Bowl ad. That's how much it costs, $7 million.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait for a $7 million Super Bowl ad to do that. All we have to do is the same thing that like pastors been doing since the 50s, man. Pick up a local newspaper in one hand, pick up the Bible in the other, pray over the headlines, and show up some places. It really ain't hard, man.
Yeah.
People act like it's rocket science out here anymore, and it's not. It's not. It's a really simple game. It is, as a faith leader, it's a simple gig. It's a simple gig. Is it hard on the soul and the body and the mind? And we need to support our faith leaders, of course. That's on the table. But at the end of the day, like, it's not that hard. You could be doing those things you saw in that commercial. You could be living those scenes. Now, whether or not your church council or board likes that, that's a whole other story, homie. Whether people in your community or your congregation are with that. And part of that is like, because I know we scapegoat congregations, like, there's a Black Lutheran leader who always shared this with me. And he always said, Len, if you're leading and no one's following, you're just out for a walk. Well, you can't scapegoat the people if you don't bring them along. But I don't have to tell you about that here. How's it going, friend?
There it comes. That's what we're getting into.
Good to see you, Ron.
Yeah.
But that's where my heart's at, man. Thanks for having me on. Seriously.
Hey, you had a little rhythm, a little bounce in some of your response there.
Yeah.
There was some poetic reading. And again, a little rhythm to what you're saying. We're going to get into to talking about music and particularly hip hop, and that's what's kind of called us to this space today. And you've written this book, Psalms of My People. It's kind of based in hip hop language, inspired by each chapter. It's kind of inspired by some lyrics how they've brought some meaning to your perspective. There are those of us who grew up in a kind of culture where it was suggested that secular music was a distraction, right? I mean, it distracted us from the important things. In a lot of religious culture, they would say, well, secular music's taking you away from God, Lenny. So how has hip hop kind of inspired your sense of connectedness and spirituality?
Yeah, music in general, I think we know for a fact is a huge part of the human experience. If you've ever done visitation with someone, like let's say, as a pastor, I would visit, we often hear these stories of, you know, older congregants who respond to hymns, right?
Yeah.
They may not know
Mm.
a lot of what's going on, but if you sing a hymn to them, they start singing the words back,
Yeah.
And so we know music has this ability to kind of reach beyond and help us communicate. It's really helpful for people who struggle to communicate. My father, for all his flaws, in a lot of ways, one of the things that he had was music, right? And music was a way that, like my father would not be able to talk to me about black liberation. And there were a lot of reasons why, right? He was systemically oppressed from having education. He got to the 11th grade before people realized he couldn't read. He was dyslexic and blind in one eye. Now that I am close to an autism or a neurodiversity diagnosis, a lot of his actions make a lot of sense, right? So there's a lot of reasons to have mercy for my father, right? But he couldn't communicate stuff like that. So instead of he couldn't be like, yo, this is black liberation and let me break down to you the best ways that I think that our people have a chance going forward. But he would be like, this is Gil Scott Heron and you should listen to this. Right? Or he would say, these are the lost poets. These are the stylistics. This is Jimi Hendrix. Right. And I remember for me, when hip hop, so music was always a huge part of our household, a huge part of our lives, a way we communicated to each other as family. Um, and I grew up in a family that we were the only nuclear family that didn't go to church on Sunday, right? Everybody else was very connected to the black church. And just my dad didn't believe in that stuff. He wasn't a stone cold atheist, right? But he was suspicious of church folk, and
Okay. Mm.
he was suspicious of the God they like to talk about because his experiences were different. He grew up going to the Panther breakfast program. He was exposed to the Nation of Islam very early on. He remembers the early gang culture of the Moon Gang, and other things. He saw Move and their rise and fall in Philadelphia, and so he had seen people, and he had seen the black church organize in Philadelphia since he was a kid through his mother and his father, my grandparents and, aunts and uncles and, cousins who became preachers and my cousin now, Nicole Duncan Smith, who's an ABC preacher and like all that stuff was there, but my dad was mighty suspicious of it.
Mm-hmm.
Mighty suspicious of anyone who had the answers. If they had a book, and yeah, he couldn't read, so that's part of it. But he was suspicious of people how they thought because they wrote their shit down that that meant something to him, right? Basically, because he would always talk about it. He was like, I don't trust Christians because the only proof they bring is their own book.
Yeah.
He's like very strange to me, right? He was suspicious of that stuff. But music,
Yeah. Well, a lot of
he
people
liked.
would gel with that today too, right? I mean, this is what we hear about the nuns, the NONESs, who are, actually probably not altogether unbelieving in a spiritual sense, but you talk about suspicion, and that's where it's coming from. Yeah.
No, early, my dad was the last generation of the first generation of Gen X, and I was born 78, and he was born I think he was born 56, so he's late boomer, but not really boomer, so he missed the 60s, you know what I mean? He's
Yeah.
like early Gen X. It depends on how you count it. And I'm like 78, real late. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my perspective, I'm like firmly in that last year of Gen X. And from my perspective, like, I wanted to go to church and stuff. I wanted to learn about, like, I like that stuff. I read the Bible, and when I was like 6, all the way from cover to cover. And I was like, I had questions. I was like, ooh, not well put together. I wish I could talk to
Mm.
their marketer. I was like, for me, I was like, Peter seems pretty important. Paul seems like he's either 5 personalities or something. But then, like, later on, I went and got an MDiv, and I was like, oh, that's just 5
Oh,
different authors,
he is. Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
But like at the time, I was like, yo, why is Paul so different? And and I really like Peter and the stories of the early disciples and all that stuff. But yeah, man, like, so music for me was the holy thing we did on Sundays. My dad
Hmm.
would wax the car, put on some music, tell us a story related to what's going on in the world. And hip hop came at a time when, like, my cool dad thought it was against it. He was like a lot of black folks where he's like, that's not real music
Hmm.
at first,
Okay. Yeah. Mhm.
So yeah, that's why it spoke to me, because my dad didn't like that shit. He
It
would
was a
like break
rebellion
my
kind of thing. Like you
yeah,
just
he would
wanted
like
to.
break
Okay.
my records. Yeah, like that's how it was early hip hop. He would break People would break your records. People would be like, you can't listen to that stuff. That stuff promotes death. And you'd be like, these are the only people who are describing what it's like for me to walk to school every morning. And you don't want me to listen? I don't understand. Right? That's how it was. I think that's why hip hop and punk rock really supported each other in the early days, because they saw uh, a lot of camaraderie,
Yeah. Okay.
in the movement.
Yeah. It's a sense of telling a story of people who maybe don't feel like they have a whole lot of voice. So.
Yeah, and hip hop, look, listen, hip hop has like its own super dope, like, um, I guess one way to look at it is that it has its own, like, hermeneutic. It has its own, like, doctrines. I mean, the 5 pillar hip hop, the house of hip hop was built with 5 foundational elements. It's like MCing, which is the oral,
Hmm.
DJing, which is the oral, like the aura, breakdancing, which is the physical, graffiti, which is visual, and knowledge, which is mental. And like that was the early hip hop parties. It was about community organizing and providing a place, particularly in the Bronx and in other places where there was incredibly dangerous, corrupt, and white supremacist, systemic, end stage capitalist conditions, so, oppressing black people. And this was a way that the kids got together. I mean, the first hip hop party happens on like 15, it happens with Sedgwick Ave, like 1560 Sedgwick. Like that's my childhood. That's a project. That's a project, a rec room. Hip hop's born there,
Hmm.
right? So like, that's where it comes from. It comes from this place where the kids had nowhere else to go or nowhere else to be. And so this is how they start expressing themselves.
Was there a first song or album to you that when you heard it, you're like, this is my experience. I feel connected to something beyond myself through this.
Yeah. I think like the first, the first one that really, and I think that's why I start the book with it, even though like I was raised on East Coast hip hop and I loved a lot of it, Tribe Called Quest, Brand Nubian, Onyx. I was really into Onyx as a kid. If you ever listen to
There's a
Onyx,
throwback. Yeah.
yeah. I was really into this guy named Schoolie D from Philadelphia, but that's
Okay.
because my older cousin Perry was into him. I didn't really understand Schoolie D's world. I was too young for that. I didn't understand the effects that the crack era was
Hmm.
having on our city. But like Schoolie was, if you know Ice T in like a recent documentary Netflix did a few years back, Evolution of Hip Hop. He credits Schoolie D from South Philly as the inventor of gangster rap. That's the first gangster rap song. And, so like that stuff was in the atmosphere. I listened to that stuff, Africa Bambaataa. And I think Africa Bambaataa, my dad, for some reason, because it was so close to Funkadelic, he bought that album. And so that first Africa Bambaataa, Planet Rock, we had that. And I think like the first one that really got me though, that like I was like hip hop gets me was NWA, FTP. And or for those of you who are wondering, I'm just gonna say it once, fuck the police.
Yeah.
And that song was the first time like I had heard Straight Outta Compton. And like, it just seemed too gang affiliated. I'm from Philadelphia. We hadn't had gangs since the 70s. That didn't really pull to me. Like we didn't have gang life. We had some of the same problems, but it wasn't gang life, right? Not like that.
Yeah.
It was something different. And so that didn't pull to me, but FTP did. Wow. Because like I understood what that meant, like because for me, like I knew what it meant to see people like Dr. Dre and Ice Cube and MC Ren, and even really to a large extent, pretty much everybody in that whole crew were like the nerdy kids. Like you could tell because if you ever been to a hip hop party, they're the dudes who show up with the speakers and they're there 2 hours early and they're hanging balloons and they put on costumes and they nervous about who's gonna show up and they made the flyer. Come on, that sounds like theater camp, bro. That sounds like Bible camp, bro. That sounds like right, you know what I'm saying? That sounds like youth group, bro. Right? And so like I knew that if these kind of artists and hip hop was really still in that heyday of like, let's have fun, let's party, let's talk about the positive parts of Black culture and Black history. But NWA was the first ones to really say like, but there's these other things happening to us that I think really only Public Enemy had said up until that point as distinctly. And so when I saw the nerdy kids, the kids who dragged the speakers to the roller rink to throw the party every Saturday night, talking about fuck the police, I was like, wow, it's bad out there. It's not just me.
Yeah,
I'm not the only one getting roughed up on their way to school. I'm not the only one whose heart drops when a police officer goes past them on the way to school. That was not reassuring to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so like I'm not the only one who watched, because from my perspective growing up in West Philadelphia on the corner I grew up on, when I was 7 years old, I watched the Philadelphia Police Department drop explosives on my neighborhood to kill the MOVE folks. So that was my first experience seeing a mass police action, right? They firebombed my neighborhood. I don't care how you clean that up, what they had to do, what the situation was. I don't care. I'm done arguing with people about the system of policing. If you don't see that how broken it is, that it's a system that not only oppresses the poor, not only oppresses Black and brown folks, but also oppresses the officers themselves. In a system that continues to churn them out, just like it churns out prisoners. And the interesting thing is that these guys have whole unions because they're exposed to my neighborhood for 8 hours where I grew up. They're heroes because they come to my neighborhood for 8 hours. The conditions people leave Black America in and could care less, fam. But they got a union for that. They get a union because they get to come to my neighborhood for 8 hours. Where's my union?
So groups so that
was like the first one I was like, wow, someone gets me, and it felt like something beyond me or more powerful than me was talking about like the things that I cared about, oppression.
Yeah. What about though? So, within our faith tradition, we have this weird dissonance where it's like, well, we're going to amplify these voices of people who said some really good things. And, in your experience, a group like NWA, describes your life in a way, gives you a sense of resonance and connection. Yet throughout history, we also have some of these people who say these great things also say some things that are repulsive to us in our own time and age, right? So
Yeah.
yeah. And so how do you look at a group of like NWA where, summed up your condition, yet also said some things that we would look back on today and be like, we can do better.
Yeah, like I deal with that a lot in the book, and the reason I deal with that a lot in the book is because like when I first made the list, it was like a love letter to like 12-year-old Lenny.
Yeah.
12-year-old Lenny wasn't thinking about like the fact that, like they might have to tell people they don't feel like any gender and that their pronouns are they. And 12-year-old Lenny wasn't thinking about being queer, they just felt queer. And 12-year-old Lenny wasn't thinking about the political ramifications of young black men being put in positions of power and never being taught consent, right? Something that white men do in silence every day. Hello.
Mm.
And like, but all these things, right? All these things. And I wanted to change the list, to be honest with you. I wanted to change the songs. I wanted to change the artists. But then I thought about queer seminarians and trans seminarians and how they often have to deal with doctrine, literature, and sacred scripture that I don't believe is meant to be weaponized against them, but is.
Yeah.
And yet they still deal with those materials quite bravely. Your church right now is standing up for queer and trans people in an unprecedented way. And I know a lot of the chuff around a lot of what the outsiders are saying is property and whatever the hell's going on with you guys with that stuff. But at the end of the day, you're taking a stand for queer and trans people, and it is seen. And it is important in these times. And so, yeah, it's hard to deal with those materials. I talk about that in the chapter with Kanye,
Yeah.
I get right into it. Like, this dude had people screaming the name Jesus Christ at the club at 3 a.m.
Mm.
Bro, what happened? Right? And I talk about that because we want so much out of these hip hop stars. We want so much out of these artists. And I think one of the things that I really try and deal with in this book is that because of our hustle culture, because of our social media culture, because of our constant access to artists, we've really lost the ability to separate art from artists, which doesn't mean you let an artist get away with anything they want, right? But one of the things that I'll read a little bit of it actually. Because I talk about it with Kanye, I think very specifically in a way that, it's hard to explain to someone what it's like being a black artist in this country and what it feels like when you finally make it, right? And so the chapter's called "The Tragedy of Saint Kanye," and the quote I go is, we at war with terrorism, racism, but most of all, we at war with ourselves. Kanye West, Jesus Walks. I know what you want here. I know what he deserves. I don't do postmortems in front of a live studio audience. That's why I quit the church. I can feel the bloodlust rise in some of you as you read even this line and slowly realize that it will not be this story, this book, this newer testament. You want me to pause in this chapter to rip that F and sell out the shreds. Psalms, scripture, music, literature, humanity is full of stories of tragedy. And this story about who we are, based off sounds that filled our worlds, Kanye will be Ophelia, out in the limb, and we will divest from the divisive war that white supremacy has left us in. Kanye West is what happens to the black artist under the white gaze. He's been hollowed out. Kanye has left the building in the same way Legion has left the building. I mean, we watched this dude go to the pearly gates and we taped it. And that's one of the lines I say. I said, Kanye fell from the pearly gates and we taped it. White men do this in silence every day. And it's hard because as a Black artist, it feels like the world is looking at you. But I know from as a budding Black historian and scholar, you know, that really culturally Black people have always seen each other. My mama's always seen me. She always knew I was a poet. My daddy always knew I was going to be a writer. My grandmother knew I would do great things out in the world. My cousin knew that I would be behind pulpits someday. Shout out to Nicole. They knew these things when I was young. And what happened was the world gave me those things. But what we mostly mean is white power structures and money started to give me those things or access to those.
Yeah.
And how do we wrestle with that? How do we wrestle with what the white gaze or what the public gaze in general does? Not even just to the Black artists, not even just to the white artists, to our preachers, to our leaders, to our politicians. This we have a perverse observer effect upon each other now. That I think as we grow, and we will grow with these tools. Social media will not destroy the world the same way that the telegraph didn't. Relax, champ. We will grow with these tools. We're just, we're in our toddler stage with this stuff. But so yes, Jesus Walks was an incredible song that was incredibly important, and I will never spin it again live because homie gets paid for it. But I'm not going to deny the fact that at the time, there were a lot of people who grew up in the church. There were a lot of people who went to HBCUs. There were a lot of people who worked at your seminaries. There are a lot of people who work in your denominational offices. There are a lot of people who work in your communities who liked hip hop and still wanted to say the word Jesus Christ at 3 a.m. in the club.
Yeah.
And, how do you wrestle with that? What does that mean? You know what I mean? And who's more faithful in that moment? You know what I'm saying? The one who, there's certainly scripture that says anyone who gets people to say my name, to call out my name, right? And what's more authentic praise at 3 a.m? What's the braver place to say, like to scream out the name of Jesus, like inside a safe congregation, or being that one girl who gets on the floor every time that song came on and be like, "Nah, it's my song.
This is it." Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And have a little praise moment, and then go home with a friend.
You talked about this being kind of like a love letter to your 12-year-old self.
Yeah.
What inspired you to write that now that you're mid-40s?
Well, I'm at the Graduate Theological Union, and most of my studies are like more in the esoteric now, esotericism. So I'm in the historical and cultural studies of religion department there, and in particular, my particular little group or department is the new religious movements, or anything that happened after 1850. So a lot of esotericism, a lot of weird stuff. And one of the questions that historians are asking themselves right now, which is a bleak way to end this, is one of the questions.
We'll come back to something happy. Don't worry about it.
All right, cool. Well, like one of the questions they're asking themselves is, if this be the last generation or the last couple of generations of humanity, what sort of record do you leave behind? Do you leave a record talking of our accomplishments? Do you leave a record warning of what not to do? What language would you write in? How would you communicate it to people? How would you put it in some sort of container, vessel, device that it would never be lost, even if we bomb ourselves to the Stone Age? How would you tell people who we were? And I've been really wrestling with this question. And music, I think music is something that every culture has done, that we know of in humanity, and it might be something that we share in common with others who might come across. So that's really what got me thinking about that. And then I was like, when I was thinking about that deep, heavy thing, I was like, yo, what would Lenny put in that time capsule? Like, what songs would you be like, yo, this was my experience. This is what it felt like to be me. And then I tried to wrestle with that stuff as an artist. I also trying to take a leap out of the box. I was really influenced by Be Here Now, a lot of zines I read early on, like You Can Bang, like Temporal Autonomous Zones, like AK Press. Like, like really influenced by stuff I saw, like other people in the '90s who were trying to figure out something beyond the church, and wanted to create something that kind of wrapped all that up. Black esotericism, black spirituality, black occultism, whatever you want to call it, from black peoples of the Americas, has always happened in the setting of the church. It's always been in the church, around the church, because it's one of the few places free people could gather. And so, to separate the two would be to do violence to it. And I think even when you're talking about a generation that was probably the least church generation at that time of Black people in America, there are these outlines of 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 biblical, scriptural, and theological language they're using to frame the worlds that they're in, and they're doing it through hip hop.
Mm. Man, that's so theological. Maybe we should end with that, but we're not gonna. You talked about dropping something to remember into the time capsule. We're both kind of late Gen Xers, come from the same generations, grew up in the generation of the mixtape. So if
Yeah,
you're
the
dropping that
mixtape.
mixtape into the time capsule, obviously you made mention of what would be on that beginning of the mixtape through songs of my people. Are there more songs that you would add to the list?
Yeah,
What's on the B side of the mixtape?
I would say "Lockdown" by Anderson .Paak if you're looking for like what happened in 2020.
Mm,
Um, Also, the Judas and the Black Messiah, Fred Hampton Jr. His son is on the soundtrack, inspired from it.
okay.
And one of Pop Smoke's last song is on there. Like it's a hot album. But I would say just because I've heard Chairman Fred speak since I was a kid, right, in different places, and 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 I didn't get it at first, right? Because like my dad would also take me to see Parliament Funkadelic. I was like, to me it was just dudes yelling about blackness on stage.
Mm,
When you're young, you don't know how to like transmute this stuff. I could tell Chairman Fred was someone important and something different, but couldn't really. So yeah, I would say like some of that stuff that's been happening is really important. I would also say everything Janelle Monáe's doing
mm.
with body and pleasure and R&B and hip hop right now. Please don't sleep on that. Do not sleep on Tank and the Bangers. Um, I think women right now, or femmes, or queer femmes, are doing the most innovative stuff in hip hop right now, which is um, that's really where all the new like underground stuff is coming from. That feels very holistic. I would also probably throw like a Roots song in there because I'm from Philadelphia and that's just like my job. So
Okay.
I would say if you're looking for what I a lot of people get mad at me, but I'd say the best 8 bars out of Philadelphia is the first 8 bars of Dear God 2.0,
Mm,
by the Roots.
mm.
And like he says stuff like um uh because like there's like this really like eerie dude singing and he's like Dear God, I'm trying so hard to reach you. Um they say I could see your face in all I do.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's so hard to believe in you. And then and then Black Thought comes in. He's just like, uh-huh. They said he's busy. Hold the line, please. Call me crazy. I thought that maybe he could mind read. Who does the blind see? Like he just goes in and he's just like, if he's like, if everything is made in China, are we Chinese? I mean, there's this one line where he's like technology turning everybody into zombies, acid rain, hurricanes, tsunamis. I mean, it's one of these epic questions okay, God, if you're out there, then like who are you, right? And it's this real wondering, this real deep theological wondering of what does it mean if you're not a theologian, a pastor, someone who's going to dedicate their lives to understanding what this is. What does God mean to you? And what does it mean towards the end of your life, right? Like, and so it's a super deep reflection.
Yeah. It's like an invitation to a practical theology, forget all the,
absolutely.
All the deep systematic stuff that you need to have like these long degrees to be able to understand. Like the practical theology is like, who is God in my experience?
We're going to have to ask these questions right now, because if I say the name to someone on the corner, I want to talk to you about Jesus Christ of Nazareth. It might mean something to a trans kid in Florida. Then it means to a black elder in Mississippi.
Yeah.
That it means to a guy in Idaho who's like in the state Senate. That it might mean to someone in California. And this is the problem. We have an ontology problem. They have taken our Jesus and broken him and made him into many others. And this will be the great wrestling. If you claim to be someone who follows the Nazareth, the one, the carpenter, you claim to be one that follows that one, well, you're going to have a hard time explaining who that person is to people.
Yeah.
Because it means so much now that it used to not mean. And how do you overcome it? Filling children with fear. This is the great challenge of our time, which I don't think is insurmountable, but it's one we have to take head on, and that's why we need art that reminds people that prophets are still out there. That's why I wrote this book. Like people are still saying holy things. It may not come in the vessels you're used to or in the delivery methods you're used to, but people are still questioning, wondering, wrestling, reaching out for and hoping for God.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what makes art so important in this age, especially when we can get so individualized and personalized. I can tailor everything to my own whims and what have you.
And the tendency can do it for you if you don't want to.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's all catered to me, and we can do that with God as well. And I mean, we have been for centuries, right? Shaping God into our own image. And art connects us to that. I think that bigger picture. And, even from a perspective of coming from my background and reading a book like Psalms of my people. I mean, this is an eye-opening experience.
Did you use the footnotes?
The full scape of God.
Use the footnotes, you did?
Yeah, I had to go pretty quickly, so I didn't get to invest in every bit of research. So I've got a list ahead of me in terms of going back and all right.
Yeah, the footnotes are
going
brutal.
Back through all these songs now.
I did that. I tried. Yeah, they were like little notes I made for the copy editors and a few others that gave me feedback, and then I was like, all right, that's it. They're going into footnotes.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, man. Seriously.
You bet. All right, friend. What song or songs would be on your spiritual playlist? You can share some thoughts in the Rethink Church community, which is a Facebook group. If this episode was helpful for you, then you might want to jump into another episode on tying the spiritual to popular media. For that, check out episode 100. It's called 10 Things to Stream Right Now for Theological Reflection. If you're feeling like you're ready to explore more in upsetting the systems that be, then check out episode number 123, Nice Church, Not Nice Patriarchy. And again, while you're listening, leave a rating and or review. The Compass Podcast is brought to you by United Methodist Communications. Again, my name is Ryan Dunn, and I'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks' time. Look forward to chatting at you then. Peace.